Hello and welcome to this episode of Fresh Fuel. This is the first of 3 parts where we're tidying up the Corolla 4-wheel drive. This episode covers a wheel change, tidying up the interior and getting it a little bit lower. This little Corolla came across my path a few weeks ago and there was a little badge on the back of it and that badge said 4-wheel drive. So I said to the bloke who owned it, I said, hey, any chance you want to sell that? And he goes, well actually yeah. He said, I'm just getting it ready, getting Warren Fitness on it, getting it ready to sell it. So I said, well, here's my number. Give me a call and I'll take it off your hands. So, basically what we have is it's called an EL55 Toyota Corolla, 1994. Common as chips, except the 4-wheel drive version is a bit rarer, and a lot of the 4-wheel drives are also automatic. So being a 5-speed manual makes this, look, not really rare, but kind of cool, kind of different. So basically the plan for it is, it's got 13-inch wheels on at the moment, 13-inch steel wheels. I've got some 15-inch steel wheels which came off I think it's a Toyota BB, and I got those a few months ago for another project of mine. And the paintwork's pretty rough on it. It's actually metallic black, but I've used them before, and you can get a 2K, so 2-pot gloss black respray kit for a car. So 4 litres of paint, 4 litres of primer and all that sort of bits and pieces. So what I thought was, I'll give it a quick tidy up, a quick gloss black, put the 15-inch wheels on it, maybe lower a little bit, and then take it up the mountain, because why wouldn't you lower the car before you take it up the mountain? Good point. Anyway, we'll lower it anyway, take it up the mountain and see how the 4-wheel drive system works, see if it's fun, use it as a runabout, and then go from there. The original wheels are a 13 by about 4.5, and the new wheels are a 15 by 6. Still not exactly wide, but a big improvement. Running a 195 65/15, fairly meaty old sidewall. The never heard before Wind Force brand is probably the reason that the car I got them off was in the junkyard. So, sort of a first test drive. But not at all, because I've been driving it for a few weeks. And I've changed the wheels. But why would you want to do a test drive in a 1994 Corolla? You probably wouldn't, but it's what you do on a YouTube car show, so that's what we're doing. Yeah, no, it goes alright. It's there's actually nothing to say. It's runs fine. It's not a bad wee car. It doesn't really need anything done to it mechanically. However, as you can see, with new wheels in the front, it's got quite a bad wheel wobble. I'm guessing it might be because the fact that because their wheels came off a crashed car. So I hope they're not buckled or wrecked or anything. But what I'll do is I'll put them on the balancer. You can see that's pretty bad. And there was none of that beforehand, so I'll put that on the balance, put them on the balancer, see how they look, and see if we can sort that out. So you get the idea. Mechanically, it's fine, and the wheel was bent, by the way. So I got another one from the junkyard. Next on the list is the hideous-smelling interior. The interior reeks. I tried spraying some deodorizer, and even tried one of these Monterey Vanilla. To no avail, it still reeks. I put the dehumidifier in it for a night and took out maybe, 200 mils of water, thinking that might make a difference, but it didn't really make a big difference. So I'll probably end up stripping the interior, which won't be a major on one of these, and give all the carpets and the seats a good shampoo, give the dash a good polish up, clean all the interior panels and that sort of thing, and I'm thinking that if it's got a leak somewhere, the underlay on the carpet is probably full of water, and that's probably what's stinking. So I'll give it a clean out, and hopefully polish up the interior and make it actually just nice to drive around in, as opposed to having to sort of hold your breath and wash your hands when you finish with it. So that's next. So the first step in the interior is to get the front seats out. Pretty simple on the little Corolla. 4 14mm bolts with no wires or anything. Just be a bit careful when you're actually taking the seats out, because the sliders underneath are super sharp and just make mincemeat of the paint. Removing the headrests can also make it a bit easier as well. Met with a pretty typical example of what's under the seat. Some old chips, pen, coins, you know the story. Vacuum, back seat out, center console out, tread plates off, stereo out, and then carpet out. Alright, got the carpet out and found a few bits and pieces. The back seat carpet reeked. It smelled like fish or something or other, and it was just damp and wet, even after having the dehumidifier in there. So I'm guessing that's the culprit on the disgusting smell. And found another couple of little surprises. Over here, tucked in under, and I'm guessing that's been there. Oh, also there. Didn't see that before. Is that New Zealand or is that? Oh, that's New Zealand. It's made its way there. Is a key, which looks like it's been there long enough. And oh yeah, surprise, surprise, if you need a spare key, best place to hide it is under your carpet, inside your car, so when it's locked, you can't get it. I guess that's what you're supposed to do, so spare key found. Not what I was expecting to find. There's actually a bit of rust over in here, which, to be honest, for a car of this era, is not normally what you'd expect to find, especially here in New Zealand. But I'm guessing, my thought is that this might have come, being a four-wheel drive, might have come from the north of Japan, where they, I don't know, salt the roads and all that sort of stuff that doesn't happen here. And being only in the driver's footwell, again, I'm guessing that for however long it's spent over there, people would hop in and out with wet shoes and salt or whatever else, and it's just sort of sat in here and rusted. Luckily it doesn't really look like it's gone through. When it suits, I'm a firm believer in do it once, do it right. So I whipped off sound deadening, and luckily I did, because underneath it was, you know, the old rust had actually started to creep under there. So I pulled all the necessary bits and pieces off, put the wire wheel on the die grinder, and just took all the surface rust off. Luckily there were no holes, it was actually literally just surface rust. And interestingly, it was purely in the driver's footwell. There was none anywhere else to be found in the car. After tidying it up, I used a bit of paint thinners just to clean the surface ready for paint. And then I used a product called Brunox, which according to Google is a combination rust neutralizer and epoxy primer in one. It does need a top coat over it, so out with a trusty can of satin black enamel. And it didn't look perfect, but it's all going to be covered, and at least now I know the rust is not going to go any further. Now, one of my regular trips out to the junkyard, I found a complete piece of sound deadening out of another Corolla, and seeing that this is not exactly a race car, I managed to pull it off in one piece, and using a spray adhesive stuck it back down in place of the 100-piece original. Next up was a dashboard. It was mainly just as grubby as the rest of the car, so I started with some spray and wipe. Once the interior is all done, I'll use some proper product on it. A rug doctor. These are a fantastic tool that I absolutely love. Quite expensive. You can get little ones which probably work reasonably well, but for a big job I find it's always best to just hire one. In New Zealand they're about $60 for 24 hours, which is plenty enough to do one if not two cars. While you're renting it, if you get the upholstery cleaner, which is the small little handle that goes with it, they are perfect for car interiors. Basically how they work is the warm soapy water is forced out the back of the nozzle and into the material, and then sucked back out with a strong vacuum cleaner. The amount of filth that these things remove is incredible. It's cold, noisy, dirty sort of work, but Lucy smashed out all 4 seats and the carpet, leaving them looking fantastic. It's time to empty the tank on the rug doctor, so I thought we'd show you the grub. Probably would come out of most cars, but it is not good. Ah, yuck! That is hideous. Check that out. That's just from the seats. Better out than in.
onwards and upwards, and so on and so forth.
By about 3 AM, Lucy had all the soft surfaces finished with the Rug Doctor, and I had scrubbed all the hard surfaces with hot soapy water and then finished them off with some interior shiner. By the following morning, the carpet was dry enough to put back in and looked incredible. They always hold an amount of moisture, so if it's a bit cool outside, I always leave the dehumidifier in it for a couple of days, and it just gets it beautiful and dry. It's amazing. The rest of the interior went back in and confirmed, as always, my opinion that interior is the cheapest, best way to improve a car. For less than like $100, it makes you feel like you're driving a new car every time you hop in it. So next up is the engine bay. Like I mentioned earlier, mechanically, the car just hums along. I mean, it looks like it obviously needs a rocker cover gasket or something like that, but for the meantime, it's good as gold. So we whipped down to the washer world, a couple of bucks, some degreaser, some aluminium wheel cleaner for the rocker cover, and gave it a whirl. Look, they do say when you're cleaning an engine bay with a pressure washer like this, be a bit careful, avoid the alternator. They reckon the moisture can get inside and corrode it. So I took a bit of note of that, went willy-nilly, and then it drove on 3 cylinders for about 3 days afterwards, so probably steer clear of the spark plugs and distributor as well. It turns out that the uber nasty mag wheel cleaner that we use destroys the trigger mechanisms like it destroys your eyes. So after a bit of frustration, I just gently tipped it all over the rocker cover and the aluminium bits and pieces, and it seemed to turn out alright. And by now I'm basically just throwing every type of degreaser I found at the workshop at it, hoping that it'll look good in the end. So next on the list is lowering the Corolla. It is a 4-wheel drive, and ideally I want to take up the mountain, so I don't want it to go too low, but at the same time it's pretty high, and the back's higher than the front, and I don't particularly like it like that. So we'll measure how much we want to take out of it, whip the shocks out, springs and shocks, and go from there, and see if we can make it look a little bit better. So the Corolla's coil spraying all around, and in the interest of a budget-friendly build and the fact that there are no off-the-shelf lowering springs, especially for the 4-wheel drive, I've decided to go with the time-tested option of modified original springs, aka cut springs. Finally. Cut springs have been around forever, and they get a bit of a bad rap because when they're done wrong, they can be pretty, they can be unsafe. But as long as they're captive, as long as the shocks are holding them in place, then there's theoretically no reason that they're any less safe than, just a straight out aftermarket replacement lowered spring. So removing the suspension on the Corolla is a fairly straightforward affair. Jack it up, axle stands, wheels off. You've got 3 bolts up on the top hat in the engine bay, 2 holding the hub to the strut, and then 1 holding the brake line on. Remove these and the strut comes out pretty easily. Right, now we've got the shock out of the car, we need to get the spring off the shock. And this can be a bit dangerous, so do be careful, because basically the shock is at full extension, holding the spring in place. And if you are to undo the top nut, then all the tension of the spring can make the top go flying. It's a bit dangerous. Some people love it, some people just do it because they can, but be a bit careful. So the spring compressors I'm using here are basically the only specialised tool you need for this job. More or less what they are is just a couple of hooks on each end, connected by a piece of threaded rod. As they're done up, the spring is compressed, and you can see right up in the top there, that it's now actually no longer just touching, it's just the pressure's come off it. So now that's enough that we can then undo the top, take the top hats off. It was an easy one. So, as you can see, the top hat is held in place by one day I'll be able to get it out, by a nylock nut. And try as you might with a regular ratchet, you might struggle to get that off. You really need the rattle gun of some sort, or to undo it while it's still in the car. Otherwise, the whole shock just turns inside the shock body. There's that one there. We've got the spring off, under a lot of tension there, and then all of this junk, which can probably go straight to the bin. Alright, and there you have the shock. And the other, and there's our spring. So, we've now got the spring bare out of the car, and we can measure its overall length, which is 310 millimeters. So, the compressed length was 180 millimeters, and the non-compressed length, or the uncompressed length, is 310. If you take the uncompressed length and you divide it by the compressed length, you get 1.7. So, what I'm thinking is, when the spring is compressed, no, rephrase that, when it's uncompressed, it's 1.72 times the length of when it's compressed. So, if we want to take off 45 millimeters of height from the vehicle when it's compressed, if we times that by 1.7, we come to, I've already worked it out, 76.5. So, my theory says, if we cut 76.5 mils of height off that uncompressed spring, when we put it back in, we will get around about 45 mils of drop. Now, it never 100% works out, probably to do with, I don't know, some kind of science. So what I'll probably end up doing is I'll take 70 mils off and put them back in, test it, and see how we go. So now we've worked out we need to take 70 mils off the uncompressed spring, more or less, to get about a 45 mil drop. So, it's working. If we sit this one on the desk, and basically we swing it around until the base, the bottom of the spring, because remember that's going to be, you're going to get the width of the spring difference in height again if you cut at the top of the spring, until the bottom is at around about a 70 mils. We can mark that. That's where we want to cut it, I think. Right, now that we have the spring cut to length, hopefully the right length, we need to put it back on the shock. So, you may find that because of how the spring has been cut and the shock length at full extension, that you don't even need to put the spring compressors back on. So, easiest way to find that is hold that up at its full length, and this could be alright actually. This may mean that we don't need to shorten these shocks, which is very exciting because that's, well, save some money. Right, so right now, if you have a look at that, you can see that we can't just bolt that straight on. So that's not going to work too well. So we're in luck. So I think what we'll do is compress these down slightly. They hardly need much. Whoa. We have literally just got in by the skin of our teeth. They're captive, which is awesome. So, I'll do the same to the other side, put them in, see how much low we got. So the fronts are sorted, back in the car, and it's time for the rears. They're pretty straightforward on this. One bolt at the bottom, 2 nuts at the top, no brake lines, and they're out. So I've got the rear shocks and springs out, some vice grips, and a ratchet spanner, make short work of getting the shock apart. And there we go. And using the same formula as I used on the front, it worked out hopefully about 60 mils to be off the rear, so marked it off the angle grinder. So, unlike the front springs, which when I cut them shorter, they were still captive, which is a bonus because I don't have to shorten those shocks. You can see the original rear shock holds the spring captive, so the spring doesn't move, won't go anywhere. Good as gold. However, when I cut the spring down to the height I want it to be, hopefully, cut the 60 odd mils off, and you can see ain't nothing happening here. It's just flinging around, it can do what it wants. So look, it's kind of alright when the weight of the vehicle's on it, because the weight of the vehicle pushes down, ideally, like so, and then it's captive. But you go over a bump, or you go over whatnot, you jump over, this does the thing. So, for this evening, I'll just put them all back together, and I will check the heights, because the shocks won't make a difference to the height the springs do, and then I will pull the shocks back out, measure how much I want to shorten them by, take them down to the local engineers, and get them to shorten them down for me. So, unfortunately, unlike the front, they're not captive, but still doable. So the rears are all done. I test fitted them before and took another probably, well, I don't know, 10, 15 mils off them. Shocks are all shortened, they're back together, and in they go. So we'll see how it looks very shortly. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. 622 or so on the front, 625 on the rear, which is more or less what we wanted. I'm not gonna lie, there was a pretty healthy dose of luck in there. However, it does just show if you take the time, do the measurements, do the calculations, cut more than once if you need to. Which is what I did on the back. It's just a little bit high on the back, so I dropped it a little bit further as I pulled the springs out for the second time. And you can end up something which looks pretty cool for what it is. It's cheap, it's safe, because they're captive, as long as they're captive. If they're not captive, just don't. And you can do it yourself, do it at home. So, next thing to do is get a wheel alignment, except I'm going to hang fire on that because these two front CV boots are completely shot, there's grease everywhere, so I'll need to fix those first. To do that, I need to take the front hubs off, and there's no sense in getting a wheel alignment before doing that. So after I've done that, wheel alignment, see how we go. Alright, and here we have the project costs for Double Black so far. First column we have the actual costs of what it's cost me. Second column we got what it would cost if you had a basic tool setup. And the third column is if you literally were started from scratch with 0 tools. So the initial purchase price was $1,000, New Zealand. Wouldn't change if you had tools or without tools. Wheels and tyres come in at $160. And most cars have a wheel brace and a jack in them, so wouldn't cost you any different if you had no tools to do this anyway. Floor well rust cost me about $50 for the Brunox and a bit of paint. Basic tools, if you had a wire brush you'd be fine, but from scratch, if you were literally starting from scratch to be able to take the interior out, bits and pieces, buy a basic socket set, some screwdrivers and a wire brush, probably around the $200 mark. Cleaning up the interior probably cost me an extra $50 for, some interior shine and a bit of soap, miscellaneous bits and pieces. Wouldn't make a difference if you had tools or not. Rug doctor hire was $60, wouldn't change if you had tools or none. And the lowering cost me about $200 to go and get the shock shortened from the local engineer. If you had a basic set of tools, you'd probably be paying an extra $50 generously to get a set of spring compressors. And if you're starting from scratch and you had the tools earlier that you'd bought for $200, then probably an angle grinder, a jack and a couple of axle stands, you'd be around maybe the $500 mark. So that brings us in with a total so far of $15.20 New Zealand dollars. If you had basic tools, $15.90, and if you're literally starting from scratch doing it in your driveway, you're coming just shy of $2,000. And that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Next episode is bodywork, primer and paint, and probably making professional painters everywhere around the world cringe. If that sounds like something you're interested in, do the old like and subscribe thing. You can find me on social media at Fresh Fuel Show, and I'll see you next episode.